And so the courtship process begins. J.J. McCarthy meeting with the Vikings, but how does that fit into their larger plan? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much, all my weird little everydayers. Come hang out every single day on this show. Make it your first listen of the day, each and every day. I appreciate you all so very much. You can, of course, find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is a podcast listening app like the SiriusXM app. You can just search out any sports team and catch live hometown broadcasts. Just search like Timberwolves or Wild or whatever. You can also find this show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. So, what's the plan, Kevin? Kevin O'Connell had a meeting with the media, and then he's been kind of doing a media tour, did some K-Fan stuff at the owners meeting in Orlando. Obviously, a lot of rumor and conjecture has been coming out of there. But beyond that, we do have some actual like direct media quotes and stuff. But we also get some direct media appearances, and therefore we can try to glean what Kevin O'Connell, who did a lot of this, is getting at with some of this stuff. He goes on Pat McAfee, he goes on K-Fan, he does like just a big press scrum. So the headline of all this obviously is the quarterback position, and on the Vikings docket late this week is a big long meeting session with J.J. McCarthy. This is going to be the main evaluation of J.J. McCarthy in the draft process for the Vikings. Obviously, the lion's share of the eval is watching his tape. That is a process that's been, undergone probably a long time ago, as the scouting departments do all their work on all these guys. But the actual like pre-draft, post-college season process, the pro day, as Kevin O'Connell described it, not something that's as important to the Vikings, which I think is kind of interesting that they're prioritizing the private workouts. And his reason for this, which I find pretty compelling, is that they want to be able to kind of control the flow of the workout. They want to be able to see him in certain situations, whereas the pro day, the actual throws he makes, the situations he sees himself in, the routes that he throws, the footwork that he practices is all dictated by the college. And the college is going to, the college has its own reasons for, recruiting and stuff to want to make J.J. McCarthy look as good as possible, right? They want him to go as high in the draft as possible. So they are going to tailor that workout to make him look as good as possible, right? And for that reason, a lot of draft prospects will decline. For example, Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Jaden Daniels all declined to throw at the combine, where it's sort of a one-size-fits-all. Everybody makes the same throws. Everybody makes everything because the combine was designed as an evaluative tool. So let's, put everybody in the same environment. They all declined that and said, I'll do it at my pro day where my school is going to be looking out for me and they're going to make me do just my best throws. And I'm going to look really good in front of the team. And of course, for the teams, that's maybe not necessarily as helpful if you can identify what you actually want to see. So they're prioritizing the private workouts, which is going to be the only time that the team actually gets to work with J.J. McCarthy, tell him, all right, we're going to do a corner route here. You throw it, right? We're going to, 16-yard corner. That's something that's all over the Vikings playbook is a 16-yard corner flag. Can you, let's see you throw that one. Let's see how you approach that. Those are going to be the on-field priorities, right? Now, what we get from Combine and Pro Day that is obviously going to be used is the data, right? The 40 times and the radar gun, if you're into that kind of stuff. But you don't need to sit there and watch a kid run the 40, right? Like you get the 40 time and you have it and you put it in your model, whatever you use it for. And that's that. You can get that off of Twitter if you want to. So you don't necessarily need to prioritize those resources. There was a story a few weeks ago about the Vikings not even going to Bo Nix's pro day. I'm sure they had a scout there or something, but like none of the like high level brass was there. Josh McCown wasn't there. O'Connell wasn't there. Kwesi wasn't there. And everybody's like, well, guess they're out on Bo Nix. And maybe not. Maybe they'll have a private workout, or maybe they have had a private workout and I just didn't hear about it, in which case I apologize. So this will kind of mark, I would say, the tail end of the evaluative process for JJ McCarthy, as he's had his pro day, he had his combine. The Vikings had private workouts with various quarterbacks at all of those events. They had a private meeting with Caleb Williams at the combine, that kind of stuff. They met with McCarthy at his pro day. But this private workout, which will be Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and I believe O'Connell as well, will fly to Michigan and have it on campus at Michigan. I think that will sort of be the wrap up for this process. And then you have the information that you're going to have, which is another reason why we maybe saw that Texans trade, but not like the immediate follow up trade to go up to 3 or 4 or wherever that's going to be. Because the QB evaluative process is not quite yet over. And that's a pretty big decision to make with incomplete information, right? So why not wait a little bit? That's part of the plan there. But one of the things that O'Connell really emphasized in terms of this process of evaluating a quarterback is building a relationship. These two guys, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, are under no delusions about how important this quarterback decision is. Their jobs are tied to it. That's the way this goes in the NFL. You basically, most GMs get one quarterback. If you hit your quarterback, congratulations, you're the GM for a while. If not, you're getting fired pretty much as that guy busts out. And the next guy maybe gets like the 4th year of that guy's rookie contract or something. So if this is a bad decision, if they make a bad decision in a month here in the draft, you can probably hang your hat on both these guys being gone in 3 years. And they know that. They are very well aware of that. So they're going to try to get this right. Of course they will. The thing O'Connell has been harping in all of these media appearances is building that relationship. You're really getting into bed with a guy. You're tying your career to a guy. You think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is going to get another chance at being a GM if he goes, like 4 or 5 years and done and busts on a QB? Had a couple mid years with Kirk Cousins and then a failure? Like, no way, right? Like, this is the opportunity. You're getting into bed with this guy. You probably want to get to know him a little bit, right? And this is comparing this process to the one everybody's comparing this Vikings process to, which is the Trey Lance trade with San Francisco, is so interesting because San Francisco, maybe they were just playing it coy, which I don't really know why you would bother playing it coy because you knew you were going to get the guy you were going to get, right? So flashing back to that 2021 draft, everybody knew Trevor Lawrence was going number 1. Everybody knew Zach Wilson was going number 2. That had those cats had kind of gotten out of the bag, right? In a way they haven't even this year, right? There's still some weird world where you're still seeing weird things of maybe the Bears won't take Caleb Williams, which probably is just like bloggers trying to get your attention. But what Washington will do is very much still a mystery. But with San Francisco, they knew it wasn't Trevor. They knew it wasn't Zach Wilson. They had their pick between Mac Jones, Justin Fields, and Trey Lance. And yeah, maybe they did say, yeah, we're going to trade up. We're going to take Trey Lance. We want Trey Lance. We want to take him at 3. We're going to go up to 3 and we're going to get him. And then Kyle Shanahan got up in front of the media and leaked a bunch of things and did this whole disinformation campaign. But if you remember the rumors around that time were that the 49ers were maybe going to take Mac Jones, maybe they're going to take Justin Fields, maybe they're going to take Trey Lance. They end up taking Trey Lance. It ends up not working out. If you believe all that, not at its face value, but what it implies, which is that San Francisco didn't really know who they were going to take. They made that trade, but they didn't really have the evaluative process complete yet. And that was what they sold you on. That's taking Kyle Shanahan at his word, who would say, like, we don't know, right? We'll see what we do. If you take him at his word, that's pretty crazy. And if you don't take him at his word and you think that he just kind of got up there and lied about taking Trey Lance, it's like, why? I don't know. Like, what does that accomplish? It's not like you're going to trick the two teams in front of you into doing something else. They already have pretty much decided. So I don't know. Weird. But the actual plan here at quarterback is a lot more robust than what it seemed like we got from San Francisco a couple years ago, and certainly a lot more robust than the way we all approach our fantasy drafts, where we go, I don't know, we'll see what happens, we'll make a decision in the moment, which is clearly not what's happening here. So I want to talk a little bit about the process that it seems like the Vikings are applying. And then we also, out of the owners' meetings, got some approvals on rule changes. There's some interesting ones that are worth noting as well. So we'll wrap things up with that at the end. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by America's #1 sportsbook. It's FanDuel. So if you want to get your gamble on, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So look, I know that you have a bracket, maybe two, the men's and the women's, and I know that they're bad. I know that your bracket is completely destroyed. Don't you lie to me. You don't have to try to save face. It's okay. Because you can just go to FanDuel, and if you don't have either player or either team playing in this game, you can just gamble on it. Just go bet on it. If you want to get started again, you can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Your first $5 bet can be anything, the heaviest favorite of the day, whatever, heavy favorite basketball team or NBA team or something like that. And right now, if you are new, you can get $200 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Moving right along here with this Locked On Vikings episode. When you're done, check out Locked On Minnesota Sports and their 24/7 live streaming channel. All things Minnesota sports, biggest news, stories, analysis of everything in the wide world of Minnesota sports, from college to the pros and across much more than football. But we do football here, ostensibly. So I want to try to piece together and just talk it out. Like, what is the plan? They're all in lockstep. Everybody who went on NFL Network, went on KFan, went on, just the media scrum. Mark Wilf went on NFL Network and talked to Tom Pelissero a little bit. Kevin O'Connell's made the rounds. Everybody who's been asked really giddily says, we've got a plan. Ooh, we're so excited. We've got a plan, which is great. Good for you. Obviously, we'll see how it bears out. But they have something that they feel really good about, right? And they, when asked about trading up, they will never deny it, right? But they can't obviously say, yeah, we're totally gonna, because that would ruin their negotiating leverage, right? Even though they've had a big giant sign on their chest that says we will trade up with you, but you can't say that on TV, right? So with all of that said, what is that plan that they are so excited about? And I think part of it is just being really high on a lot of guys. Kevin O'Connell said that he's really grateful that this is the year that we're looking for quarterback, because it's such a deep class at quarterback, which means, boy, we're happy that there are 4 good guys this year, because we can maybe if we get up to 4, we're still happy with where we are. That's the way that I take it. And of course, all of the rumor mill stuff that came out of the combine, and rumors that have kind of leaked publicly since. The Vikings are really high on JJ McCarthy. If you don't believe that, then then you don't believe anything. Which, hey, maybe that's a decent outlook, but I am pretty confident that they're very high on JJ McCarthy. So the idea where they trade up to 4 with the Cardinals, they take McCarthy, nobody, the Giants don't leapfrog them, nothing happens, QBs go 1, 2, 3, 4. They are perfectly happy with that. That said, if they were just good with McCarthy, knowing that Drake May and Jaden Daniels were going 2-3, they probably would have been able to pull the trigger on this by now, or maybe they will pull the trigger just as soon as they're done with that visit with McCarthy, and they've finalized that process and said, yes, absolutely. We didn't get a weird red flag when we had our private workout with them. There's still questions that they maybe want to answer, but they're very excited about that. I would wonder if that deal, if they do have a deal in place, which wouldn't surprise me. It's something that Kwesi's already told us that he has done in previous drafts, with the Lions, which is to, put a deal in place, and then if the board falls a certain way, you execute the deal. And if it falls a different way, you don't execute the deal, but that way you don't have to commit to it until you know who's on the board. But you have it negotiated, so you're not scrambling to like stare each other down over draft picks at, with the clock ticking, which again, like these deals, especially deals of this magnitude, really difficult to like put together on the fly. There's a lot of moving parts and stuff. So we got a lot of time right now. Let's talk about it ahead of time. That's part of the trade talks and why I think you're hearing so many rumors right now and so much conjecture and so many little piecemeal reports and little fragments of what's going on that we all have to piece together, is because those negotiations are happening, certain parts of it leak, and everybody's trying to get this thing done ahead of time because it's pretty tough to get this done in a 15-minute clock, right? But I digress. I would guess, educated guess, I guess, that they also have fairly substantial offers, put it that way, to Washington and New England at 2 and 3. And hey, maybe those guys will take one, right? Like let's put something they can't refuse out there and let's see what they do, right? And if they both say no and we still can go get JJ McCarthy, we're happy with that. I think that is their quarterback plan right now. But it's also very important to understand how much homework goes in to those evaluations, right? I think for most of us, unless you're somebody that's like writing up draft guides and watching tape all the time, don't listen to this part. But I think and that's not me, right? I'll watch the players I watch, but I'll get to like 24 at most. Because I want to take my time with those guys, right? Like I don't want to just flash through 500 people and have like, super like corner of my eye takes on all of them. That just will be as good as guessing to me. That maybe you're different, but that's just my brain. But the evaluative process here is so much more in depth than even just, watching tape. And it's certainly more in depth than what I would say the like median, very, very vocal football fans is, which is I watched a bunch of college games and I have an opinion from what I like saw on TV 3 months ago. Obviously they're doing more than that. It's tape study, it's watching those workouts or whatever you get from them. It's obviously the data analysis with age and, combine athleticism stuff, the production analysis, I'm sure is part of it, right? You've got it's Kwesi, right? Of course there's a model. And then there is the part of building a relationship and ensuring that if Kevin O'Connell is going to hitch his wagon to JJ McCarthy, that this is a guy that I'm going to want to work with for the next, 3, 4, 5 years at least, right? And hey, if you still got your job in 5 years, you probably did okay with this. Then we can talk about the future beyond that then. But that evaluative process, once it is finalized, then I think you make your decision on what you're doing on in terms of draft trades. And I would guess that the other teams are on similar timelines, right? I don't know what private workouts we have going on with Washington or New England and JJ McCarthy and Drake May and Jaden Daniels and all of those guys. So like it's different with everybody, right? Like with Drake May, you have Josh McCown in. And by the way, an interesting nugget from O'Connell was that, hey, part of the reason we brought in Josh McCown was to get the perspective of a team that traded up and took a quarterback and developed him, which is Carolina, right? Like, okay, you've kind of been through this situation now. So having somebody that just sat and watched and understood how it went down can be pretty helpful perspective. Not to mention just as a respected quarterback, having that guy as your QB coach and the fact that he coached Drake May in high school. That's something, right? And it makes that evaluation a little bit easier. Whether or not you are targeting Drake May, whether or not they intend and think that they are going to take Drake May, they at least have a lot of information about Drake May that is privileged to only the Vikings, because only the Vikings have Josh McCown in the building telling them, oh yeah, right, yeah, when he was a senior in high school, we actually ran this play, he did okay with it. I bet we could teach it to him again. That kind of insight is going to be exclusive to the Vikings and will give them a leg up in terms of, that evaluative process. how that affects things, in an auction style market where it might not matter how high you are on him because New England says we're taking him and, shove off. Maybe that'll happen, right? Maybe it all gets rendered moot. But I think emotionally where I'm at on this right now is a little bit trust the process. And at the very least, if they do end up with making a decision that I don't like, which I don't know, I'm pretty at peace with any of the quarterbacks that seem to be available to them. Obviously, I wouldn't be very happy if they decided to make Bo Nix the starter, but even that, you got to give it a shot, right? You got to give it a year or two and say, okay, how do I feel about this, right? You can go in with a prior and a hypothesis, but you got to be willing to update it and, have a little bit of patience. So from that, perspective, from that angle, it's fairly easy to just sit back and be comfortable and understand whatever decision these guys make, they have a lot more riding on it than I ever will. For me, what is riding on whether or not they take the right quarterback is how fun the next few years are to do the job I'm going to do anyways. And it's just a matter of do they win or lose those games? For those guys, it's jobs, livelihoods, careers. This could be the pinnacle of their career. This could be the biggest blown opportunity of their life. So they're trying to get it right. So with all that said, let's zoom out to the league level now. There are some rule changes that actually might change the way that the Vikings approach roster building, and might actually change a lot about the way that we view the next few months after the draft and in terms of training camp and roster cuts and stuff. So I want to kind of catch you up on what you may have missed there, and then also update you on those effects. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by the best place to get last-minute tickets. It's Gametime, which is an app you can download. You can go to gametime.co, and they have tickets on all kinds of events, from any sports game to concerts, comedy, theater, and more, all the way up until that event starts. There is no, you're too late for this. You can decide on Saturday afternoon that you want to go see a Saturday night show, and you can find tickets to it. Even an hour into the event, it can have already started. You can still go get your tickets. So be spontaneous. Go do something fun at the last minute that you didn't plan at all. Or if you were supposed to plan and forgot, who among us? And you can get tickets at Gametime. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. The Gametime guarantee means that you will always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Moving right along here with this Locked On Vikings episode, it is time now to talk a little bit about the new rules. So this is the actual purpose of the owners meeting, is for the owners to get together and actually vote on rule changes, tweaks, and other procedural things, which requires the competition committee to be there and requires all the coaches and GMs to be there, which is why they're all in that same hotel in Orlando. And then it sort of also turns into this, there's a lot of sidebars, right? But there are some interesting rules that got changed. Obviously, there is this hip drop thing. There was a question about that yesterday on Twitter Tuesday. So I talked about that a little bit. To be honest, I don't think it's going to end up being too big a deal. There will be fines and we'll all get mad about them, but they won't affect our live viewing experience. So they'll be out of sight, out of mind, except for the Tuesdays when the reporters tweet them out. And then eventually I think they'll figure out how to properly enforce it. And it'll take some time to kind of figure that out. But I don't actually want to get too deep into those weeds right now. Instead, there are some interesting roster building things that are different. And the big one is the kickoff, which is absolutely going to have an effect on roster building. So they are adopting the XFL style kickoff. If you didn't watch the XFL, what's wrong with you? The XFL rules. It's the UFL now, but it ruled in 2020 for the 5 games it had. It ruled the last couple of years. It's awesome. You should be watching the spring leagues, which are actually on this weekend. So you can see how this kickoff works. Go Battlehawks, by the way. So the basic idea, and by the way, this is Sam Schwartzstein's brainchild. He's the person at the XFL that like spurred this idea that really drove it and got it implemented. But the problem with the kickoff as we know it is concussions. Way too many concussions, way too many injuries, right? This is the least safe play in the game is the kickoff, which seems kind of dumb because honestly, how often do you even pay that much attention to the kickoff, right? There's a return every once in a while and it's exciting, but otherwise it's a fairly boring and mundane play most of the time. And the problem is that you've got the whole team starting all the way from the other end of the field, running full head of steam at the return team, full head of steam, collision. That is going to generate concussions, right? That's going to generate horrific impact, especially now that they have the chips and they've got tracking data and impact data. Then they can know just how bad that is. So trying to redesign this, I'm all for. And Sam Schwartzstein's idea was essentially to look at where the kicking team typically was when the returner catches the ball. Are they at the 40, 30, 20, whatever, and just start them there with no running start, and then say you can start running when the returner catches the ball. So that's what it is. You line up right there on the line, and then the return team lines up about 10 yards away from them. You kick the ball, nobody's allowed to move until the returner catches the ball, and you run the play from there. It sort of can turn into a pseudo run play, so running backs as kick returners will probably be that much more popular, although the way that kick returns sort of developed in those XFL kickoffs wasn't too different from the way that kickoffs return now. They didn't become, you didn't have teams running counter, although I think you could, and that'd be a cool innovation. But what you had was this sort of playground for special teams coaches to scheme stuff up. The clip you maybe have seen is of one from the 2020 XFL season by the Battlehawks, by the way, caw-caw, that was actually a reverse that scored from there. And it's like, look, the kickoff can be exciting. Most of the time, they get tackled around the 30 and it's pretty normal still. But there is always going to be a return. The touchback is heavily penalized. So there's almost always going to be a return, and the injuries got cut to like a fraction of what they were because you took all that momentum. You took that running start out. Now it's a run play, right? How many concussions do you see on a run play? So the impact that will have, for one, obviously kick returners are back in business, right? By the way, Cordero Patterson just signed with the Steelers, if you care about that, but Kene Nwangwu, right? All right, cool. Lock him into the roster. Probably would have anyways because, hey, somebody's got to be the kick returner, and of course he's going to win that job. But, if you wanted to say that the kickoff was so dead that it won't be important or whatever, and maybe you had that, you don't have that anymore. It's going to be a thing that happens every single possession now, and Nwangwu's one of the better ones in the league. So he'll have that job. And then what'll be interesting is like most special teams units were built from what I'll say like the mid-sized players and the smaller players. So we're talking tight ends, linebackers, you'd have D linemen, but the light kinds, like you wouldn't put your nose tackle out there, right? You wouldn't put you would put a couple offensive linemen out there at the kickoff return. You'd put them as the up men. That wouldn't have to run a lot, would just have to block someone for a while. But even that wasn't all that common anymore. I remember the Dan Connolly return, but that was like 2008 or something, 2007, something like that. So that was, forever ago. No, it would have been 2006 because it was against the Packers, and it was how the cycle goes. My brain's healthy, I promise. But I think this may be the return of potentially bigger special teams units where you might want to have, those guys don't have to now cover long distances. And because the return or the kicking team, the coverage team doesn't have to run a long distance, they're not necessarily going to want to put their wide receivers and their defensive backs in at kickoff coverage. They might want bigger bodies. That will change things a lot versus punts too. And that might change who is in on punts because it'll change who's on your roster. For example, right, you'll still have your punt gunners on the outside. You'll still have your Najee Thompsons, but in terms of like a punt blocking team, that was almost always like linebackers and tight ends because they still needed to be able to turn around and run down the field, right? And then those same players would be on the kickoff unit. But if you have offensive linemen on the kickoff unit, or maybe bigger linebackers, more D linemen, those kinds of guys on the kickoff unit, you're not going to have room on your roster to have a whole other group of special teamers dedicated to just your punt unit. So you might have defensive linemen trying to block punts, maybe actually, and trying to block 4 punt returns. And maybe there's a whole innovation there. But the numbers might change. So as you put together your 53-man rosters in a couple of months, once we're past the draft and we've kind of got our 90-man, and you want to look at who you think will make the team, remember, it's like 9 or 10 O-line used to be normal. We might go up to 11 or 12 just because they'll be important on special teams, and 5 tight ends and 5 linebackers, and maybe not 11 defensive backs. Maybe you don't want quite as many of those because those, 10th, 9th, 10th, 11th guys are just for special teams, and you might just not need that many bodies. Maybe just one special team defensive back, and it's Najee Thompson, right? So maybe rosters switch around a little bit there, and then obviously the kick returner is now a position that you actually care about. A lot of interesting stuff with the kickoff. There's also, real quick, there were some changes to practice squad elevation, and in particular, a change to what you can do on cut down day with injured reserve. You may now put 2 players on injured reserve with a designation to return on cut down day. You didn't used to be able to do that. If you went onto injured reserve in camp before cut down day, before the season actually starts in earnest, that player would be on IR all year. That was season-ending IR. It had to be. So if you wanted to put a player who, say, got injured in camp onto a short-term IR where they could come back in the middle of the season, you would have to do that the next day. So you'd have to roster them for a day, cut another player you probably wanted to keep, hope that player clears waivers, and then put him back on your roster the next day while transitioning the other guy to IR. Made for a really weird kind of song and dance, and then you would lose players that way, and players would get poached and go on to other teams and get claimed on waivers. Very stupid system. They have done away with this. Now you can, if you get a couple players that are hurt in camp, you can just put them on IR and it's normal. I love that because I think the other system was really just opened you up for a really weird way to lose out on a draft pick that you actually liked, but you just had to be weird with for 1 second. And you would be, making 53-man roster cuts, not necessarily on who made the team and on merit, but on, who had the pedigree that maybe somebody else will want to poach. And I think that that's the wrong way to do it. So I like that. I think that's a really good rule change. I love the kickoff change. I think that's great for the sport. And I think it's more entertaining. It's safer. I think the only thing that the NFL didn't like about it is that it wasn't their idea, and they've taken that medicine. So good on you. I will talk to you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.